I pulled up to the gate and knew something was off. No lights, no wreath, no fake snow on the hedges, just a black outline of the house like it hadn't been touched all month. My foot hovered over the brake. This was the Sunset Dunes Villa. 5 levels of stone, glass, and polished money. My parents' trophy house. So, where on earth was Christmas? I was 28, assistant set designer in El Paso. Not starving, but not exactly thriving. I'd worked a rush model till 6, skipped lunch, skipped dinner, figured the big meal would be here. Now, I was staring at a dead house on Christmas Eve with my stomach growling and my palms sweating. Quick note, before we continue, tell us in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, back to the story. I rang the bell once, twice, nothing. I texted Mom, then Dad, waited, called both, straight to voicemail. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. Part of me thought it was a prank. My mom loved surprise parties. Maybe they were all out getting something and left the lights off for effect, but my gut didn't buy it. That gate had always opened the second my bumper hit the curb. Now it sat shut, like it knew I didn't belong. I backed out and drove across town, down toward 129 Mesquite Loop, the first house we ever owned. Stucco peeling off like old paint, flat roof, chain link fence. They'd locked it up 5 winters ago, right after Dad's 3rd car wash opened, and Mom closed her first 7-figure sale. But when I pulled up, one window glowed yellow, a single bulb, no decorations, no tree. I parked and got out. Cold wind hit me in the neck. I pushed the gate. It creaked, same as it always did. Then I reached the door, same brass knob, same hesitation in my chest. I turned it. It opened with a soft squeak. "Hello?" I stepped inside. Carpet still had that dusty detergent smell. The air felt heavier. In the living room, my dad stood like a statue. Same height as me, but thinner than I remembered. My mom clutched a teacup like it might save her life. At the table sat a woman with short silver hair, posture like steel. I blinked. Grandma Ruth Calder? She stood up, smiled. Trent. I hadn't seen her since I was 17. She moved to Vancouver with Uncle Nolan back then. Said the Texas heat made her bones scream. She'd built one of the biggest logistics service firms in the Southwest. Still had part ownership, last I heard. She hugged me, smelled like lavender and peppermint, strong arms. She held on tight, and for a second, I didn't care where I was or what I'd walked into. Then I looked up. My parents watched us like I'd just kicked in the door during a meeting I wasn't supposed to know about. Eyes sharp, faces stiff. I stepped back and let go of Ruth. "You weren't supposed to be here tonight, were you?" Dad didn't answer. Mom looked away. That's when I knew. I'd walked into something real ugly. We sat down at the old dining table like nothing was wrong, but the split was obvious. Grandma Ruth sat beside me, close enough that her elbow brushed mine. Across from us, my parents sat stiff, shoulders tight, plates lined up like props they forgot to rehearse with. The meal was plain, roast chicken, dry potatoes, green beans cooked too long, no candles, no music, just forks and breathing. Grandma carried the table. She always did. She asked about my job first, leaning in, eyes sharp and warm at the same time. I told her about set models, late nights, cardboard walls that had to look real on camera. She nodded like it mattered. She asked about my health, if my back still hurt, if I was eating real food or surviving on junk. While she talked, she rubbed my knuckles with her thumb, same way she did when I was a kid, and scraped myself up. Dad barely touched his plate. He kept glancing toward the front door like someone might knock and save him. Mom smiled too wide, too fast. Every time Grandma laughed, Mom's smile shook like it was about to crack. Then Grandma said it. Casual, clean, like she was asking about the weather. "So," she said, cutting her chicken, "how's the villa I sent money for 5 years ago? Did you get that big window you wanted?" The room snapped quiet. I looked at her, then at my parents, then back at her. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "What villa?" I said. "I still rent a tiny place near downtown." The sound came fast, fork hitting plate, metal on ceramic. My mom's hand flew to her mouth like she could shove the moment back in. Dad stared down and swallowed hard, his throat moving slow. Grandma didn't look at me again. She turned to them, posture straight, voice flat and cold. I wired money for Trent's home, she said. Every cent earmarked. Where is it? Mom rushed in with a breathy laugh that didn't land. She said something about timing, about how real estate moved fast and plans changed. Dad muttered about investments and leverage, words stacked on top of each other with no meaning. Grandma raised one finger. Just one. They stopped. You bought a villa with my money, she said, each word slow and sharp, and you kept him in a rental. My ears rang. The room tilted just enough to make my stomach tighten. That house, the one I visited on holidays, the one they showed off like proof they won at life, the one I stood outside of earlier that night, locked out, hungry and tired. That was supposed to be mine. Grandma reached over and squeezed my hand once, firm and steady. Then she looked straight at my parents. You will fix this, she said. All of it. Nobody spoke. My parents didn't argue. They didn't apologize. They just sat there, caught. I stared down at the table, pushed my plate away, and stood up so hard my chair scraped loud against the floor. I was still standing when Grandma Ruth spoke again. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She just laid it out like terms on a contract she expected to be signed. Within 9 days, she said, looking straight at my parents, you execute an escrow and a temporary transfer placing the property under Trent. Final title follows on the next business cycle. Entire property. Clean. Dad's color drained fast. Mom's face folded and tears spilled, but she didn't make a sound. She stared at the table like it had answers written on it. Grandma didn't stop. If you do not comply, she added, I will file for fraud and misappropriation. I have transfers, texts, and calls archived. Every step. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. His jaw worked, but nothing came out. Mom wiped her cheeks with her sleeve, still quiet, still not looking at anyone. Grandma pushed her chair back and stood. She took my hand, her grip solid, not shaking at all. I am not spending another minute in a house of lies, she said. She didn't wait for a response. She led me toward the door. Behind us, no one followed. No one called my name. I grabbed my jacket off the hook, and we were out in the cold before the door even finished closing. In the car, she told me to drive into the city. Her voice softened just enough to give directions. When she said, pull up here, I almost missed it. The Marigold Room. I'd only seen it in articles and photos, the kind of place people bragged about getting into. She stepped out wearing that old cardigan like it was a crown. Inside, the staff clocked her instantly. Smiles came quick. A manager shook her hand like they'd known each other for years. We were seated without waiting. She ordered without looking at a menu. Duck, ribeye, truffle potatoes, a 35-year scotch, creme brulee to finish. I watched, stunned, still catching up to my own night. When the drinks came, she lifted her glass and looked straight at me. To the years stolen, she said, and the days that are yours. My throat closed. I stared into the amber liquid, felt my chest cave in, and almost lost it right there. She reached over, tapped my cheek with her napkin, and smiled like she'd caught me sneaking candy. Don't cry yet, she said. I have a story. She told me about Vancouver rain, about a day it soaked her shoes clear through, and she had to walk into a bank meeting anyway. She twisted it into a joke by the end, and I laughed before I realized it was happening. The food came, rich and hot. We ate slow. We laughed more. The weight in my shoulders eased inch by inch. By the time dessert hit the table, I was leaning back, breathing easy for the first time that night. When the check came, she waved it away and stood up, already pulling on her coat. Come on, she said. Christmas isn't over. I grabbed my jacket and followed her out into the city lights. I pulled up to my place just after 11, headlights bouncing off the cracked stucco and metal stair rails. Grandma followed me up 2 flights, her hand skimming the railing, not asking for help. I unlocked the door to apartment 2C, pushed it open with my hip, and stepped aside to let her in first. It was exactly what I'd described. 360 square feet if you were generous. Fold-out bed pushed against the far wall, wobbly wardrobe I found on the curb, 2 plastic chairs, and a table with one leg shorter than the others. In the corner sat my plastic Christmas tree, bare branches, 5 bent ornaments, and 1 crooked star. Grandma didn't flinch. She walked in slow, her eyes scanning everything, but not with judgment. More like she was reading a book she'd already seen the ending to. She ran a hand over the top of the chair, stepped around a pile of fabric samples on the floor, and sat down on the bed with a soft sigh. She patted the cushion beside her. "Sit with me." I kicked off my shoes and dropped onto the bed. The springs squeaked. I stared at the floor for a second, then said it all in one breath. "I've had months where the rent emptied my account down to coins. I've skipped groceries to finish set pieces on deadline. Holidays meant instant noodles. Sometimes I just didn't come home. I'd drive to the villa gate, sit there like a guest, then leave." She didn't rush in with pity. She reached up and stroked my hair, slow and quiet, like when I was sick in 5th grade and convinced I'd flunked math forever. Her hand paused at the back of my head. I turned slightly and saw her eyes, wet but steady. "I want you to come to Vancouver," she said. "There's a spare room, no rent, just rest." I nodded, but my chest was tight. I looked down at a scuff mark near the front door, the one I made dragging in that cheap desk I never used. "I'll think about it," I said. I meant it. I wasn't lying to her, but I was scared. Resting felt like giving up, like I hadn't earned it yet. She nodded. "No pressure, I can wait." We sat there for another minute without speaking. The radiator hissed once, then quieted. Outside, a pop cracked through the air. Then another. Somebody set off fireworks, probably a block or two down, lighting up the night in red and green flashes. Grandma looked toward the window, smiled faintly, then kicked off her shoes and folded one leg up. "Hope you don't snore," she said, pulling the blanket over her knees. That night, I didn't dream. I didn't twist or wake up sweating. I just laid flat and slept like the floor couldn't drop out from under me. By morning, Grandma was already calling lawyers. I watched her sip motel coffee from a foam cup, while she dialed a number from memory like it was tattooed behind her eyelids. By noon, she had someone flying in. He showed up the next day, suit-pressed, silver hair, briefcase like a vault. Said his name was Raymond Reed, used to handle corporate dissolutions for her freight company back in the 90s. He didn't shake hands, didn't ask questions, just opened the case and got to work at my folding table. That whole week, my parents showed up like students called to the principal's office. Every day, sometimes twice. Their faces aged in real time. They brought folders, flash drives, envelopes from banks I'd never heard of. Dad's posture shrank by the hour. Mom wore the same black coat 3 days in a row and didn't touch the tea I poured her. Grandma sat on my fold-out bed with her reading glasses on, going line by line. She circled things, flagged clauses, asked for corrections. Raymond would scribble something, make a note, then hand the page back without comment. It was brutal to watch. I didn't feel sorry for them. I was still too raw. But I'd never seen them that quiet. On the 4th day, she made 3 calls I'll never forget. The first was to her bank rep. She listed off transfer numbers like grocery items. The second was to someone at her old firm, confirming the valuation of what she'd liquidated the year before. The third was to a district fraud investigator she knew from back when regulators still had teeth. While she was on that one, she looked up at my dad and said loud enough for both of them to hear, "This is my life savings for my grandson, not your stage props." Dad didn't argue. He just sat down, hard, like the floor had vanished beneath him. Later that night, after the last set of documents was signed and filed, he stood up and walked over to me. His voice barely carried. "I was wrong," he said. "I thought I could—" He stopped, looked at the floor, and stayed there. Mom walked over too, arms open. "Honey," she said, "please." I stepped back. My chest locked up. I wasn't ready. By day 7, the temporary transfer was filed and cleared. The final title path was laid out and scheduled. Raymond handed me a sealed folder and said, "It's yours now. No gaps, no tricks." Grandma signed one last page, then closed her pen with a snap, like it was the period at the end of a long, ugly sentence. The next morning, I drove her to the airport. She wore a thick coat and a red scarf that kept flapping in her face while she wheeled a tiny suitcase behind her. At security, she turned to me and squeezed my hand. "Choose peace over guilt," she said. "That's the only fight worth winning." I nodded, throat tight. She kissed my cheek and walked toward the gate like she was just off to run errands. The deed cleared the following week. It came by courier, sealed, signed, notarized. I held it in my hands like it might vanish. Then I stuffed it in a drawer and grabbed 2 boxes, my drafting knives, 2 sketch pads, the coffee mug Grandma gave me, and that dumb plastic tree with the 5 bent ornaments. Walking into the villa, as the owner hit different, I stood in the foyer, a keys cold in my hand, and just breathed. The same walls that once made me feel like an outsider now felt quiet. Not warm yet, not home yet, but something shifted. The hurt didn't go away, but it stopped dragging me under. I started gutting the place, sold off the useless things first. Glass sculptures, a massage recliner no one ever used, a grand piano nobody in the family could play. I turned the gym into a model shop, built shelves, set up better lighting. I stripped the faux Mediterranean nonsense from the backyard and planted desert succulents around the pool, things that could survive heat, drought, and neglect. Work picked up. With no rent draining my account, I could take better gigs, say no to the cheap ones that burned me out. I got sleep. I ate better. I stopped grinding myself down to prove something. Every Sunday, Grandma and I video called. She'd show me her pea shoots in mason jars or the fresh snow outside Nolan's porch. One week, she told me a banker was dragging his feet on a deal and she was ready to shake him till his teeth clicked. I laughed so hard I choked on coffee. I sent her photos of my new set pieces, modular backdrops, portable cityscapes, fake stone walls built with real technique. She loved the photos but always asked if I was eating, so I started cooking. Nothing fancy. Rice bowls, roasted vegetables, a few overcooked chickens. I sent her pictures of those too. 3 years passed like that. Steady. Quiet. Breathing room I didn't know I needed. Then, in mid-November, my phone buzzed with a Vancouver number. I picked up without thinking. "Trent," Nolan said, his voice cracked halfway through. "It's Ruth. She's fading. She keeps asking for you." I was out the door in minutes. I forgot my laptop, left half a sandwich on the counter, and barely threw clothes in a bag. The only thing I made sure to bring was her old scarf, red with a tiny stitched corner that said RC. I flew coach on a red-eye, barely sat still, landed shaking. Took the train, then a cab. Walked into the ICU like I belonged there. She looked so small, tubes everywhere. Her eyes fluttered open when I said her name, and she smiled like I just told her a secret. I sat by her bed, took her hand, and didn't let go for 4 weeks. I slept in a chair beside her. I held her fingers and tucked blankets around her when nurses weren't looking. I read every machine beep like it was Morse code. The nurses started calling me the Shadow. I didn't care. Every morning, I told her she wasn't alone. Every night, I kissed her forehead and promised I wasn't leaving. It was snowing when she squeezed my fingers. Light flakes tapped the ICU windows like they were trying to get in. Her hand trembled once, then steadied. She looked at me, eyes clearer than they'd been in days. "Build spaces that feel warm," she whispered. "Not perfect, just warm." I nodded, too choked up to speak. She gave my hand another squeeze and added, "If a relationship only hurts, even with parents, you cut it. Your peace matters." 1 minute later, the monitor let out a long, flat beep. I didn't panic. I just rested my forehead on her hand and stayed there while nurses moved in with practiced calm. She didn't fight it. She went soft, like she wanted it that way. My parents arrived 4 hours too late. Mom looked like she'd been crying in the car. Dad stormed in with snow still melting in his hair. He saw Nolan in the hallway and went straight at him. "You waited to call us," Dad snapped. "You did this on purpose." Nolan didn't move. "This was her choice," he said. "We followed her lead." I stepped between them before it got worse. Dad turned away, jaw tight, fists clenched. Mom touched my arm, but didn't say anything. I didn't say anything back. 4 days later, we held the service. No church, no reception, just a plain room at a Vancouver funeral home with folding chairs and the sound of wind outside. She didn't want roses, she didn't want speeches, just white daisies and the cream sweater she used to wrap around her shoulders when she read the paper. Nolan stood on one side, I stood on the other. My parents came late, sat in the back, and left early. When it was time, I walked up, placed the bouquet, and kissed her forehead. It was cold. I whispered, "I'll try to live right," and walked out before the tears took over. 8 days later, Nolan texted and told me to come to his office. Said we needed to go over her estate. I wore clean jeans and the coat she bought me that first winter I visited. His firm overlooked downtown, wide windows, gray light outside, glass conference table that looked like nobody ever leaned on it. He didn't waste time. She sold the firm 3 months ago, he said. Final valuation landed just over $900 million. I blinked. The number landed and the room seemed to tilt. My ears buzzed. I stared at him, waiting for a punchline that never came. Nolan opened a thick folder. Her trust is split between two people, me and you. He passed a copy across the table. I read it twice just to be sure. To me, $420 million in cash and a portfolio named the Ruth Calder Fund. Not shares, not delayed, not conditional, mine. My parents' names weren't listed anywhere, not even a footnote. Nolan cleared his throat. She wanted the division to reflect who showed up. Before I could say anything, the conference room door flew open. Dad barged in, red-faced, holding some letter Nolan had sent out earlier that day. Mom trailed behind him, pale, tight-lipped. "You did this?" Dad barked. "You poisoned her against us." "You should sit down," Nolan said. "I'm not sitting," Dad growled. "This is a setup." She was confused. Nolan calmly pulled a USB drive from the folder. "It's all on video. She explains everything. Notarized, time-stamped." Dad slapped the USB out of his hand. It clattered to the floor and skidded under a chair. He turned to me. "She was manipulated," he said. "She never would have done this if you two hadn't gotten in her ear." I stood up. "You stole from her. You lied to her. And you left me out in the cold for years." Mom opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes dropped. She turned and walked out first. Dad stood frozen a second longer, then followed, slamming the door behind him hard enough to shake the glass. I reached down, picked up the USB, and handed it back to Nolan without a word. Right after the will reading, Nolan slid a thick envelope across the table toward me. "For Trent only," he said. "She left it in her safe, handwritten, no copies." Her handwriting hit me in the chest. I recognized the slanted R immediately. My throat closed up, and I had to blink hard just to steady my hands. Back at the villa, I turned off every light but one, sat down at the kitchen island with just the lamp overhead, and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in that same clean, sharp handwriting, along with a bound black folder that looked more like a court exhibit than anything sentimental. The letter was 3 pages, direct, just like her. She warned me that my parents would come smiling, that they'd bring pastries, make small talk, and act like it was a fresh start. She said when charm didn't work, they'd shift. Guilt, threats, revisionist history. That they'd try anything except the truth. She wrote, "You don't owe them your voice, Trent, just the boundary." The folder was worse. 22 years of records, wire transfers, handwritten notes, voicemails, emails, even clipped audio from calls she'd archived. There were spreadsheets from when I was in middle school showing expenses routed through her name and filtered into properties and shell accounts I'd never heard of. Things signed in Gareth Calder's hand, my father. I read until sunrise. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just felt cold, steady, like someone had flipped a switch in my brain that would never go off again. 3 days later, they showed up. They pulled into the driveway in a black SUV I didn't recognize, probably leased for show. They were dressed like they were headed to brunch. Dad in a blazer he hadn't worn since Mom's award gala. Mom in a pale blue sweater with her hair curled the way she used to do when company came over. They carried a pastry box and a bottle of wine. I didn't miss the label. It was the exact one I gifted them 2 Christmases ago, the one they never opened. "Trent," Dad said, all smiles. "We were just in the area. We brought your favorite," Mom added. "Hazelnut Danish, right?" They sat down without being asked. Dad launched into a speech about family, about rebuilding trust, about how life was too short for grudges. He mentioned restarting the business like it was some noble act of redemption. Mom folded her hands and leaned in. "All we're asking for is a little grace," she said. "Just a few tens of millions to get stable again." I looked at both of them and said, calm and flat, "No." The smiles cracked fast. Dad's voice rose. "We gave you everything. You think this is all yours because you played the victim long enough? You owe us," Mom said through tears. "We raised you. We built your life." I reached under the table and placed the dossier on top. They froze. I didn't need to say a word, but I did anyway. Any contact from this point goes through my attorney. If you push, the record speaks for itself. Dad stared at the folder like it might bite him. His shoulders dropped. Just like that, he deflated. Mom kept crying, but now it was quieter. Real. She looked at the floor, then back at me. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "We just got used to taking." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I stood and opened the front door. They walked out slow. No hugs. No goodbyes. The door clicked shut behind them. That sound hit harder than their exit, like a seal breaking, like air being let into a room that had been sealed too long. After that day, I didn't touch the villa for weeks. I needed to let it breathe. Eventually, I stripped it down to what felt real. Warm paint in every room, not that sterile white my mom loved. Real plants, some succulents, a couple fig trees, even one fiddle leaf that refused to die. I hung frame photos of Grandma in every room, not the posed kind. Candid shots, laughing, cooking, giving a side-eye during dinner. I wanted her in the air, not just in memory. I opened a studio out of the old garage and called it Calder Stage. No fanfare, just a sign with black letters and a simple mission. Humane sets, community builds, and school projects. I turned down the big-budget productions that didn't care about people, took on theater programs that needed sets on nickels, helped nonprofits build welcoming shelters with color and dignity. With part of the trust, I launched a foundation under her name. The Ruth Calder Fund covered housing, laptops, flights, food stipends, whatever the kids needed to actually stand a chance. No red tape, no prove you're worthy hoops. Just help, fast and direct. I met every recipient personally. One 18-year-old told me gambling wrecked his dad's life, and he'd been couch surfing since 16. He said school felt like a fantasy for other people. I handed him a manila envelope with everything covered and a printed copy of Grandma's words. "You don't owe anyone your silence, just the boundary." I still drove the same old hatchback. People stared when I pulled up to board meetings or dinner spots. I didn't care. The money gave me freedom, not to impress, but to walk away. If a job smelled like rot, I didn't entertain it. Every quarter, I flew to Vancouver, no fanfare, just a carry-on bag and a bunch of white daisies. I left them near the lake where we'd scattered her ashes, then walked the shoreline alone, breathing that thick, cold air and watching the fog roll in over the trees. Back home, I made strong coffee every morning, same brand she mailed me once in a care package. I ran the desert streets before sunrise, legs burning, lungs open. That sweat kept me sane. Some nights, I took out her letter and read it slowly. I didn't cry hard, just enough to feel the weight and remember why it mattered. Eventually, word got around that Dad's car wash chain had folded, some unpaid lawsuits, eviction. Mom started selling kitchen gadgets online, cheap bundles, fake discounts, nothing with her name on it. I never reached out. I didn't gloat, didn't dig, didn't check for proof. Peace meant not needing to watch them fall. I stayed focused, studio, foundation. People who actually cared. That was the life I was building, one where I didn't have to shrink or beg or perform. I ended each day by locking the studio, watering the plants, and lighting one candle by her photo. Just one. I was 33, still in El Paso, same hatchback with the scratch on the passenger side, same neighborhood full of cactus fences and cracked sidewalks. But the weight on my shoulders wasn't the same. It sat different now, solid but earned. On Christmas Eve, I stepped outside just after sundown and started lining the front walk. I used the warm white lights, not the blinking gaudy ones, just steady and quiet, like her. I wound them low along the ground and clipped each one firm so the wind wouldn't knock them loose. I hung a plain wreath on the glass, not fake pine cones or glitter, just dark green with a soft ribbon tied at the bottom, the exact shade of mauve Grandma used to wear on Sundays when she didn't care what anyone thought. It felt right. I stood back, checked the angle, then moved inside. The 5 bouquets were already prepped, white daisies with just a single sprig of eucalyptus in each one. I placed them in the window, spaced out, stems trimmed neat. One for every winter I lost standing outside this place like a guest. 5 years I could never get back, but I could mark them, I could name them. I went to the kitchen and brewed the same strong coffee she used to send me from that tiny shop in Vancouver. It filled the house fast, sweet and heavy, like someone had baked something, even if the oven stayed cold. I leaned against the counter and let the smell wrap around me. The old rental came back to me in a flash. Fold-out bed, sagging wardrobe, that pitiful plastic tree with 5 bent ornaments and a top that refused to stand straight. And me, half-starved, counting change for gas, pretending I was fine. But the memory that stuck harder was the way Grandma looked across the table that first night at the Marigold Room. That exact second when she tapped my cheek with a napkin and told me a dumb joke about bankers in the rain. I laughed so hard I forgot I used to be invisible. The gate buzzer stayed quiet tonight. I didn't wait for it. I didn't expect it. I didn't check my phone. No more hoping someone would invite me in. I had keys now. I had doors that opened when I turned the knob. The foundation files sat on my desk, stacked and sorted. Next year's cohort already circled and tagged. Faces I hadn't met yet, but kids who needed a shot, same as I once did. My kind of Christmas list. Nolan texted me a photo of Vancouver lights glowing soft over the inlet. I sent back a video clip. Desert sky, orange and gold behind the ridgeline. He texted back one word. Perfect. I poured one small scotch. Nothing fancy, just enough to tap the rim and say it out loud so it counted. I'm okay, Grandma. I'm living right, just like you told me. The lights outside hummed low. The house stood still. And for the first time in years, the word home fit exactly right. Before I let you slip away, tell me this. If protecting your peace meant cutting off family, would you do it or give one more chance? Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Even something as simple as great story means a lot to me.